This is going to be the first in a series. I don't know if it's going to take 2 or 3 on scent control. And scent control is a very interesting topic. A lot of people try to avoid it because they know nothing about it. And it's something that you can't see. And because scent control is something you can't see, odor, there's lots of companies that have bogus stuff out there that they claim will eliminate your odor. And some of them, to some extent, will, but not nearly to the point where you can not pay attention to wind direction anymore. Even those guys that use those ridiculous sprays, which is basically sodium bicarbonate and water, which is baking soda, they still pay attention to the wind direction. There's a lot of stuff on TV where they claim, this is scent control, blah, 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 but they still pay attention to the wind. They still always look at what wind direction it is, because in reality, what they're doing is definitely not scent control to the point where you can negate paying attention to wind direction. And because in the hunting industry, there is no policing agencies. So, there's nothing to police the validity of the products in the scent control category, whether it be sprays or antimicrobial treatments on garments. There's just a lot of really fictitious stuff out there, and it may have a little bit of scent control properties on it or within it, like sodium bicarbonate does, baking sodas, which you put in your refrigerator to take foul odors out of your refrigerator. But it's definitely not something that you can spritz on your clothing in a wet form, basically sodium bicarbonate and water, and expect that to absorb all your human odor. That is not going to happen. I don't care what anybody says on any TV show, because those guys will endorse anything for money. They get paid to do it, so they endorse it. The hypocrisy in this industry is beyond belief to me. I don't endorse anything for money. If I endorse it, it's because I've proven to myself that it works, and I try to pass that on to other hunters to make them be more successful. There's so much time put into hunting, as far as scouting and prepping locations and buying saddles and tree stands or whatever the case may be. There's just so much money spent on hunting that I for the life of me can't understand why hunters don't want to take advantage of what I feel, and I've proven to myself, is the absolute best technology ever brought to the hunting marketplace to negate wind direction. And personally, I don't believe anything on any manufacturer's websites. So even ScentLock, ScentLock owns the patent on using activated carbon in hunting garments, and anybody that wants to use activated carbon, they have to go to ScentLock and pay them a royalty to be able to use activated carbon. Manufacturers' websites are designed to sell stuff. That's all they're designed for. And hunting manufacturers take advantage of technologies or whatever it may be that are already within some form of industry worldwide. And that's exactly what ScentLock has done. They actually are using activated carbon, which is hands down the most absorbent substance known to man at this point. So for me, I don't believe anything on anybody's websites. I certainly wouldn't believe anything that the TV advertisement said, or a lot of the social media stuff does, because everybody does it for a monetary reason. If there's a technology, I Google it. I Google it, Wikipedia it, whatever it may be, and I see to what extent that it's being used in other worldwide industries, governments, whatever the case may be. Because the hunting companies, they don't have staff scientists, they don't have research laboratories, they can't afford it. They're not that big. The hunting industry, really, when you look at the scope of things, the hunting industry is very, very small. It's very tiny, it's very minuscule. So they basically piggyback of whatever technologies that are out there that are proven in industries and worldwide governments. Any technologies worth their weight have been R&D'd and by a lab's staff scientist, and there's for any technology that actually works, there's thousands of applications worldwide that actually use it. And if anybody wants to verify what I'm saying, just Google activated carbon and see how many uses there are for it in the world. I mean, we're talking chemical warfare suits. NASA uses it in their spacesuits. The US government uses it to store hydrogen gas and nitrogen gas. It's used in paint respirators, water softeners. It's used in EMT, every EMT vehicle has activated carbon pills. They give it to people if they pick them up and they've ingested some form of poison, like a little kid or something, because it actually absorbs the poisons in their stomach. Every hospital uses activated carbon for the exact same reason. They use it to filter whiskey, vodkas. It's used in every automobile has activated carbon in it someplace for filtration or an absorption purpose. So activated carbon is not something Scentlock just pulled out of their hat, or Greg Sesselman when he started the company. He didn't pull it out of his hat and say, hey, let's use this stuff. You know, it's a proven technology. So do yourself a favor and Google activated carbon and look at some of the hundreds, if not thousands, of uses that it's used in worldwide markets. Industries can afford it. They have labs. They have scientists. You look at somebody, you know, in the pharmacy, for instance. It costs almost $2 to $3 billion on average to bring one drug to the marketplace. That's because it costs so much to R&D it, and then they also have to get it through the, through the Drug Administration and get it approved for the market. But the cost in doing that is absolutely astronomical. So again, the hunting industry, no companies have staff scientists, whether it be soaps, detergents, you know, they don't make it. They buy it from larger manufacturers in other industries, and they just have it rebottled or whatever into their own containers. Activated carbon is made through a process. It's not like going out into your fire pit and pulling, you know, coals out of your fire pit. That's not activated carbon. Scentlock does not make the activated carbon. They purchase it. It's already in the marketplace. So Scentlock is the same thing. You know, they are taking advantage of technologies that are in the marketplace. So they buy activated coconut carbon because that's better at absorbing the molecule sizes that the human body emits. And to make activated carbon from coconut shells, it has to be heated at 1450 degrees plus Fahrenheit, and it has to be while it's under pressure. So it's a very specific technology. They sell the stuff in, you know, you go to a pet store, you can buy it for filtering fish tanks. People use it in cat litter boxes to absorb those types of odors. It's just used in thousands of processes for absorption and filtration throughout the world. There's been two things that have primarily changed my success rate when bow hunting. And the first one was in 1981. I found a saddle in a store. I saw an ad in Deer Hunting magazine, and I found one in a store. Nobody knew what the hell it was. Looked like a bunch of seatbelt parts gone wrong, and but I could see the advantages of it. So that was the first thing that totally changed my success rate. And the second thing was in 1997, I had saved my money and I bought a Scentlock suit. And now when I say a suit, I had done research on activated carbon, so I knew what activated carbon was, and I knew Scentlock owned a patent to it. When I say a Scentlock suit, I'm talking about jacket, pants, gloves, and a head cover with a drop-down face mask, and that's very critical and important. You have to have the face mask or a ball cap that has a drop-down face mask in it that basically covers your face, your mouth, your nose. The only thing that's exposed is your eyes, and it tucks into your jacket, and then you zip your jacket up. And then you also have to use rubber boots, some form of scent-free boots, not leather or cordura because they have seams and they will leak odor. but leather or neoprene in conjunction with it. And you also have to have a very clean backpack. You know, if you got a regular backpack, it's got to be washed in scent-free detergent from time to time and dried outside, because you can't put it in your dryer usually. And then it's got to be stored in some form of an airtight container by itself. Don't put it in with your scent lock. Scent lock has to be stored in that as well. But anyway, you have to do everything in conjunction with each other. You know, you watch the TV guys and they got a jacket, pants, and gloves on, and a pair of rubber boots, and they got a stinky backpack. They got a logo hat of one of their sponsors. Their hair's sticking out. You got ridiculous face paint on their face. Some of them even have beards. Their necks are exposed. I mean, 40% of your odor comes out of your head, your mouth, your nose, your ears, your hair follicles, your beard follicles. Even the guys that's sponsored by Scentlock, I mean, they didn't wear head covers with drop-down face masks because they want everybody to see their face. And I don't know why, because that should be irrelevant in an ad. If you're going to do an ad for a company, you should use it the way it's designed to use. But you know, you see these guys showing themselves with the deer they just shot, and they got a logo hat, or you see them in a tree and they got a logo hat or some non-technology hat in accordance with their Scentlock jacket and pants. And trust me, those guys are playing the wind. A lot of them even say they are. You know, they talk about the wind direction before they go hunting. So if you're not doing the whole thing right, which most TV guys do very few things right in my opinion, because where they hunt they can get away with murder because there's so many mature bucks and they never get shot at until they're 4 or 5 years old. I really don't pay any attention to those guys as far as their skill sets, because they never kill anything in an area where there's any pressure. You know, if you're not killing something in an area where there's competition, your skill set's pretty much irrelevant to me, or at least what you think your skill set is irrelevant to me personally, and I'm sure a lot of other guys as well. You know, you look at all the sports icons. You look at Tom Brady, LeBron James, Phil Mickelson, Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, Pete Sampras in his day, Roger Federer. You know, anybody that's a sports icon in a sport has basically competed against tons of kids through high school. You know, maybe 40, 50, 100, 200, 300, depending on the size of the high school. And then if they were really good enough, they got scholarships to go to college to play that sport. And then if they were really good in college, they got to drafted into the pros or turn pro. You know, like a tennis player, they don't get drafted, or a golfer, they don't get drafted. But if they were good enough, they could turn pro because they could compete. And then to be an icon in the actual sport, you had to outperform all the other professionals. So becoming an icon in a sport is a big, big deal. And the one unique thing about that is those guys compete against literally hundreds of thousands and oftentimes millions by the time they hit that icon status to reach that icon status. And they've competed against them on the exact same football fields, tennis courts, swimming pools, golf courses as everybody else. So they have competed and beat everybody on the same exact under the same exact circumstances. TV on hunting, that's not the case. These TV guys, they don't compete against a single person. There's no competition where they hunt. There's tons of mature bucks. Mature bucks that are very easy to call in and rattle in and decoy in, because they never ever get shot at, or they have no negative consequences while they're growing to maturity, because they're allowed to pass till they're 4 or 5 years old in a lot of cases on a lot of these TV shows. You know, I don't know how many times I've watched a TV show and, you know, a 150-inch buck walks by and they're like, yeah, we need to give him another year. Well, you can't do that if you're in a pressured area. When you're on public land and free knock-on doors properties, you got competition. And it's just nothing like that. If you get an opportunity, sometimes a 2.5-year-old is the biggest buck in the area, or possibly a 3-year-old. So, you know, you have to keep that in mind. When you don't want to listen to somebody that doesn't compete against anybody competitively to reach whatever they think is a professional level, because they're not professionals. I would almost bet 30 to 50% of the bow hunters in this country are good enough to compete against almost all of the TV guys on the same properties and probably do every bit as well, if not outperform them. Whereas the opposite is not true. If a TV guy that hunts open edges of short crop fields and pick corn, hay fields, a lot of times over corn in the weeds, hidden in the weeds, if they had to go and hunt pressured property on public land where they had to be in swamps and be in there way before daylight, they wouldn't have a clue what to do. But anyway, so you can't pay attention to what a lot of the TV guys do, most of the TV guys do, concerning scent control. Because they really, I've never seen any of them that knew what they were talking about, to be honest with you. That may be a little bit egotistical and arrogant for me to say, but it's the truth. You know, I can say that because I'm not getting paid by anybody. I'm my own person. I say what I want. I talk about things that work because I've done it, used it, and I've been witness to it working. You know, I've got personal studies myself where things have worked. So these hunters that say, and there's lots and lots of them, a lot of hunters say you can't fool a deer's nose. And to put it bluntly, that is so not true. You can definitely fool a deer's nose. First 35 years I bow hunted and gun hunted even, I paid 100% attention to the wind direction. Let me tell you what I consider to be old school ways of hunting when I did have to pay attention to the wind direction. I had to check the wind to see what trees I could hunt. You know, back then I would typically, you know, when I'm driving down the road, because I never sat on any hunting property, I never owned anything, so I always had to go someplace to hunt. And usually if I did have a place to hunt, I had several trees that were, you know, set up for different wind directions within a close area of each other. So I would check the wind, and by checking the wind, I would usually look at flags. You know, there's always homes and stuff that have flags along the road, so I'd look at flags to see which way the prominent wind direction was. I used the seriously old school method of using milkweed, and then in the 80s when they were available, I also used some scent checkers once in a while with a little, you know, dust that flew up. But milkweed was much better at showing you thermals and swirls and stuff because it hung in the air a lot longer. It was so light. But that, to me, that's old school. That's basically once you get in a tree, it just tells you, you know, you throw milkweed up, it just tells you where a deer is gonna wind you from. So, but I use milkweed probably because Leroy used milkweed back when I started hunting. I hunted with a 35-year-old guy, and I was a teenager, and he used milkweed. He used it back in the 50s. Once committed to a location, you know, thermals and swirling winds would occasionally get me busted. So even though, you know, I'm looking at the flag and I set up in an area, set up in a location where that prevailing wind was correct for that location, lots of times, you know, the wind would end up swirling, or thermals in the morning if I was on ridges or hills or in hilly areas, or if I was in an area where there was a tree line when the foliage was on and the, you know, the wind would actually hit trees and turn and go down. Some of the wind would turn and go down the tree line, and then if it hit a corner, it'd swirl, you know, just like a whirlpool in a river. So, you know, many times, even though there's a prevailing wind, you're going to have to deal with swirling winds and thermals. It's very common. And again, foliage. When you're looking at early season, or if you're hunting in a state where the foliage is on pretty much the whole season, that foliage acts like a wall. You know, even if you're hunting a little opening in a timber area, you know, not necessarily a crop field, wind will actually hit the tree, and it'll follow, you know, a certain part of that wind will just turn and follow that, wherever that foliage, you know, if it's hitting it at a 45-degree angle, it's going to hit some of that foliage, which acts like a wall, and it's going to turn and go down that edge, and eventually, because that edge, if it's in an opening, it's probably going to be some semblance of a circle, it's going to swirl, and you're just going to get busted no matter where you hunt. And you couldn't count on the wind staying in the same direction, or the thermals or the swirls, for, you know, more than 5 or 10 minutes. It was moving around that much. So that made it very, very tough. Entry routes were an issue as well, um, for a couple of reasons. If I were walking, because I hunt bedding areas a lot, so if I were walking along the edge of a bedding area, and even though were going to go in the bedding area to hunt a location where the wind would potentially be right for where I'm sitting, if I'm walking down the edge of the bedding area, I also have to make sure that the wind's such that with my entry route, that I'm not blowing my odor, because back then, there was a lot of odor coming off my body because it was permeating through my clothes. I had to worry about wind blowing odor into the bedding area, or if I was walking down the edge of a field or an opening or something, a lot of times does and fawns or even sporting bucks will bed just off to the side if there's any semblance of brush. So if the wind is wrong there, they're going to wind you there as well. So another issue with entries, and this happened to me on several occasions where I could visually see it, when I would walk down a runway, to get to my location, or just walking through open timber to get to an area where there was security cover, if a deer crossed my entry route, especially mature does, they were really, really good at this because they always made a noise. They always let you know they were there. A lot of times bucks don't. When they smell something, they just turn around and leave. You never know. You never even know it was there. But mature does, if they cut my track, they would smell where I walked in, or if my clothing brushed against vegetation, because your odor, you could wash your clothes and hang it outside for 50 years and there's no human odor on it whatsoever. As soon as you put permeable clothing on, you're emitting human odor all the time. As long as you're breathing, you're emitting odors, and it's not going to take long for your human body odor to permeate through permeable clothing, and then you're going to get winded. So this deal about washing clothes and my clothes are 100% clean, that's a nice thought, but it doesn't take long before your body odor permeates through it, and you will get winded if something passes downwind. So I would have does cross my route or hit my entry route at some form of an angle, and they would immediately smell where I had walked in. Even if I wasn't touching vegetation, they would smell where I walked in because there was odor coming up out of my boots, and those odor molecules drip back down to the ground. Whereas scent lock, with your pant legs over top of your boots, when the odor comes up out of the top of your boots up through the throat when you move your foot, there's like 16 to 18 inches of pant leg with activated carbon in it to absorb those odors before they actually go down and hit the ground. Well, that wasn't the case with regular clothing. As soon as it came out of the boot, it passed through the side of the pants and then drifted down to the ground and left an odor that a deer can definitely smell. And several times I had deer smell that, does, snort, stomp their foot, leaving their interdigital gland, and then turn around and leave. And then a couple of times I had other deer come and actually hit, as soon as they hit that interdigital odor where that doe stopped, because when they stomp the ground, they're leaving an odor, and it's a warning odor, it's a caution odor. And I had other does come by, actually, as soon as they sniff that interdigital odor, they just turn around and leave. They didn't even snort, they just left. So entry routes were a big issue as well. Brushing against vegetation. I was very limited to where I could go with entry routes because I like hunting security cover, and a lot of times when you get close to the security cover where you expect a shot to be in a certain zone, if you had brushed against vegetation with your entry, you left odor. You left odor on the vegetation. For any of you guys that have hunted very long at all, I 100% know you've had deer, if you brushed against vegetation with your entry, whether it be through weeds or brush against a branch, whatever the case may be, you have been able to see deer, witness deer actually come through and smell that. Sniff on the side, maybe you went through some briars, it smelled the human odor on the leaves wherever you brushed against vegetation. And it's very common, to see deer as they're walking through vegetation, they're sniffing everything. they're sniffing for danger. They're sniffing for, I'm not saying they're sniffing for human odor, but they're sniffing for danger. So, you know, they're going to pick that up. So that was another major issue. This is something that I don't hear very often, but it happened to me, you know, relatively frequently, is everybody's like, well, I just hunt the wind, I know where the deer are coming from. Well, you know, you can do that. There's definitely lots of times where I knew exactly where a deer was coming from, and typically when I'd see that deer, that's exactly where it came from, and that's still the case to this day. But what do you do about the deer once they pass by you and now they're on the downwind side? So they may have came from upwind, but as soon as they pass by your location, now they're on the downwind side of you, and they wind you, and they snort, and they take off and run. Well, anytime a doe snorts, she's making a pretty loud noise, and mature bucks in heavily pressured areas, they don't move that much during daylight hours. Usually when I get opportunities, it's in the last 5 to 10 minutes before dark, so they don't cover a lot of ground, you know, before dark when they get up and move from their bedding area. By having a non-target deer spook once it got to your downwind side was a major negative, because even if she didn't snort, she's still going to take off running. And if a buck is bedded relatively close, you know, within 100 yards or even 200 yards, depending on how windy and noisy it is, rainy, they're going to hear that. You know, they're going to hear that deer either snort or take off running. And they can differentiate a deer running from danger versus a deer just, you know, being pushed by something. They can definitely differentiate it. When they're running from physical danger like a human entry, they go for a long ways. They basically take off for a long ways, and they're on typically a pretty hard run. And a mature buck, which is what I'm trying to pursue, you know, they can definitely tell the difference between that. Another thing I had to end up doing was I had to quit setting up locations on sides of ridges and in saddles, you know, valleys, and those types of areas. The thermals and the swirls would just kill you. You know, I used to hunt those a lot, and I did kill a couple deer that way, but on many occasions, you know, they'd be coming in and all of a sudden the wind would swirl, and, you know, because you're kind of in a valley, and the wind would swirl and you'd get busted. So thermals and swirling winds pretty much made it to the point where by I'd say the late 80s, I just quit setting up areas on sides of ridges or in valleys. Having to pay attention to wind means places you can't set up. Some years, my best rut phase spots, and keep in mind, I know the stats now, I didn't at the time, but 55 to 65% of all, you know, Pope and Young buck entries were taken during the rut phases of whatever that state's rut phase period is. So, you know, with that high of a movement pattern, daytime movement by mature bucks, that's when you want to concentrate your time. And I was the same way back then. Even in the 70s, I keyed almost all of my serious bow hunting activities around the rut phases. So during the rut phases, there were times when I would not be able to hunt my best locations because the wind wasn't right during the days I had off work. Now keep in mind, rut phases are a relatively short period of time. You know, out of a 3 to 4 month season, you're looking at pre-rut through peak rut. You're looking at about a, you know, 3, possibly 3.5 week time frame. So not being able to hunt your best locations because the wind was not correct on the days you had off work was a big, huge deal. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. I see that all the time, and I hear people say that all the time. Man, I have this spot and I wanted to hunt it, but I just couldn't hunt it because the wind wasn't right. Well, take advantage of technology and then you won't have to worry about that. On several occasions, I had bucks that I wanted to shoot chasing does around me they not be able to shoot them because they wouldn't stop, but they kept moving around in the area. And when the couple of times when a doe would get to the downwind side, because they may have came in from upwind, when the doe got to the downwind side, she'd smell me, and then they would bolt and leave the area, totally negating any possible opportunity of them swinging back around me, because these deer were just running around in chase mode. So that was another huge negative, is, you know, does being pursued by a mature buck would pass downwind and then wind on my downwind side. To state that wind direction totally dictated where and how I hunted would be a complete and utter understatement. Wind direction dictated everything for the first 35 years I bow hunted. So anybody that can sit there and honestly say that I don't know the difference between hunting the wind and not hunting the wind, you really need to get a life, because that is so not true. I definitely know the difference. Let me tell you a couple of the stories that I did when this would have been in 1998, when I actually started getting enough confidence in how I was using and storing and caring for my scent lock. I did a couple of tests, and again, these were tests, and I usually did them during the October lull, and I always did them on public land in a place where I knew there wasn't going to be a mature buck. I'd hunted there early season. I saw some doe activity going from point A to point B, and I'd see it like maybe 2 times during the first 4 days of season. So I would go back during the October lull, because they're very patternable. Does are very patternable throughout the season, you know, bedding to feeding. So I would go back, and on the first hunt, I would always go back when the wind was going to be blowing from where I was sitting to the route that these deer would be going down, typically from public land swamp into some ag on a nearby private piece. So the first time I ever did this, first time I sat was with scent lock on. So the first time I sat in the tree, and this was in the evening, and wind was blowing directly out of the south from my tree to that runway. A doe and 2 fawns came out of the swamp, just like they had earlier in the season, and as they were moving through the briars, and you know, there was a runway along that edge, they were nipping on briar leaves and stuff, and just kind of browsing their way to the, let's see, they were going from west to east. So they walked right by. I mean, they went right by me. She never raised her nose. The fawns didn't do anything. She just meandered by. And when she was directly downwind of me for probably a 5 to 10 yard period, because the wind was straight out of the south, there wasn't any swirling because there wasn't anything to make it swirl. She just walked right by. So the next day, I went and I hunted the same exact location, had the exact same wind direction. Again, it was an evening hunt, and I was wearing my old, prior to using scent lock, just old permeable hunting garments. And I got in the tree. This was a major wake-up call for me. Major wake-up call, one of several. Here comes the doe and the fawns, come out of the swamp, feeding on the briars just like they did the day before. And when that doe got in some semblance to the north of me, because the wind was out of the south, she stopped immediately and turned her head so fast and looked in my direction. She couldn't see me in the tree because there was still foliage on the tree, and I was in camo, but she could tell there was a human there. She knew that she had picked up human odor, and she stared in my direction for probably 10 or 15 seconds, and then she didn't stop her feet or anything. She just started blowing. I mean, and she was blowing hard, and she did that for probably a minute, and then she turned around and ran back into the swamp with her fawns. So that was my first test that was like a wake-up call for me. My next test was actually, it wasn't designed to be a test, but it ended up being a test. I was hunting out of a tamarack tree, and there was a cattail area, dry cattail marsh to my west, and the tamarack tree was about 20 yards outside of the cattail marsh. The deer traffic on this morning hunt were going from east to west, so they were coming out of crop fields maybe, I don't know, 3/8 of a mile away, and then coming through public land timber and then into this marsh I was in, heading into this cattails to the west. And these 3 does, and I think there was 4 fawns, and they were mature does. They were browsing through the marshy area, nipping on buds and stuff on the red brush, and they moved by me probably within 5 yards of the tree. So the wind was actually out of the west. So they came in from my downwind side, and they came and they went right by me. And when they got over by the cattails, this one doe picked me out of the tree. I think I was wearing mossy oak breakup scent lock, and which is a relatively dark pattern, and she picked me up in that sparse tamarack tree. And I think I was about 22 feet up in this tree, and I was in my saddle. And anyway, she picked me, and she stared at me for probably 15 or 20 seconds, which is a long time. And then she started slowly moving around to the south side of the tree. And the other 2 mature does, as soon as this doe started doing that, they could tell she was uneasy just by the way she was moving, and her ears were twitching. They could just tell. Does know. You know what I'm talking about. And anyway, they started following her. The fawns just kept browsing around. They really didn't care. But the other 2 does started following her. So I got 3 does going around to the south of me, and I know what was going on. They were going to go back to the east side of the tree and then try to win me, even though that's the direction they had already came from. And while they're moving around, she's not staring up in the tree at me, but she always had me in her peripheral vision, so I couldn't move a muscle. You know, I had to make sure these does got around me, went in the cattails, you know, just in case a mature buck came by, because if they would have swooped, my hunt would have been over for that morning. So anyway, they got down to the east of me, and they were probably, I'd guess, 25, 30 yards downwind directly downwind of me. You know, and they know when they're downwind of something because they could physically see something in the tree. So they got directly downwind of me. And then that doe just, you know, she was testing the air, and the other 2 deer were like looking at her like, what's going on? And they were looking in my direction, but they didn't see me, just that one doe. She had her nose up in the air, testing the air, and I'd say about 2-3 minutes after she was comfortable that there wasn't any human odor, so it wasn't a human threat, they swung back around the same direction they just came from, around to the south, and then walked back over by where the fawns were and meandered into the cattails. So that was confirmation where those deer were trying. They were physically trying to win something because this one doe had seen it in a tree. So as long as I don't move, I don't know what they think that blob is, but as long as it doesn't move and they're there for that long a period of time and they can't wind anything, they felt comfortable and they moved back around and went in the swamp. Several times with big bucks that I've killed. You know, I've had them come in, you know, where I was set up on the south, let's say on the southeast side of a primary scrape area, you know, because typically during the rut phases, the wind's primarily out of the northwest. So I, you know, set up on the south side of the scrape area. And on 2 occasions in Michigan, I had deer coming where I thought they were coming right into the actual scrape area, and they did not. And they were both midday, and they both circled around me, downwind of me. They went directly south of me, so they went through my wind current to the south, and they didn't wind me. They never thought a thing of it. And then they walked up near the base of my tree, and they scent checked the scrape area from downwind. And then once they were comfortable nothing had been there of interest, then they went back and went on about their way. One was a 154 incher and the other one was a 136, I think. Both times those bucks were directly downwind of me. 100% directly downwind of me at about 20 to 25, 30 yards, where they would have definitely caught my wind. And when one of them actually walked right to the base of my tree, right where I had stood, and took my backpack off and hung it on a step, and then put my saddle on and climbed up the tree. He didn't sniff the tree or anything. He just, scent checked, walked past the base of the tree and lifted his head and did a lip curl, scent check in that scrape area, and then turned around and left. He was satisfied, nothing was there. I've had so many times where deer came in from downwind, or I've shot deer downwind. When you get to the point where you don't pay attention to the wind, probably 50% of the deer you see during a hunt are downwind of you at some point, because you don't pay attention to the wind. You just hunt a spot on the merit you chose it for, and during the morning or evening or seasonal time frame or rut phases that you chose that spot for. You just hunt it because you think it's ready. You don't have to pay attention to wind direction. So this is just the entry video. The next video will pretty much be on the technology of activated carbon, because I think it's very important that you understand the technology. You can Google it and read it all you want, but until you physically understand how activated carbon works, it's hard to understand how you could fool a deer's nose using it, because there's no doubt it's tough to fool a deer's nose. I played that game for 35 years, and it's just a very, very tough game, but it can be done, and it's not that difficult. Once you learn the process of how to use it, care for it, and how to store it and use other stuff in conjunction with it, it just becomes common. Once you get used to the process, it just becomes habit when you use it. So it's not that difficult. It just takes some time, just like saddle hunting. I see YouTube videos of guys that don't have a damn clue what the hell they're doing in a saddle. They haven't figured it out, and they may have been using it for 2 years. So it takes time to figure stuff out. And there's so much junk on YouTube now, especially saddle hunting, and I don't really think there's anything on YouTube about scent control, really. But anyway, the next one will be on activated carbon technology. This is hard to believe, and I'm going to say this probably multiple times. If you take one pound of activated coconut carbon particles, and these particles, keep in mind, 1 particle of activated carbon is smaller than a grain of sand. So to know the porosity of these particles, they have to use an electron microscope to look at the interiors. But if you take all of the interior micropores, tertiary pores, the exterior surface of all the particles in a 1 pound tub of activated coconut carbon, and you flatten them all out, and where everything was butting up to each other, the area that would cover would be 34 acres. You can Google that and find that out. That's actually laboratory testing. That is not something I made up. It's not on ScentLock's website. It's not on anybody's website. It's actually in the actual researched technology of activated carbon. Just imagine that. You got 34 acres in a surface area in 1 pound of activated coconut carbon particles. So that is a whole lot of surface area to absorb and to have for human odor molecules to bond to, because they do actually bond to it. There is a charge when you make activated carbon that actually draws in molecules to it, and it does have a bond to it as well. So anyway, the next one will be on the activated carbon technology, and it'll also be I'll tell the stats on ScentLock getting sued, because they did get sued at one point in time, and through a laboratory testing at Rutgers University, they actually proved to a United States District Court that activated carbon and ScentLock suits performed exactly as they were advertised. In fact, in the dismissal ruling by the United States District Court, and I think this was in Florida is where this case ended up, the actual scientist at Rutgers, who has no affiliation with Scentlock whatsoever, he was just a scientist that studied activated carbon in a lab. That was his basic job. He stated that when he was using likely 10,000 times more odor-related molecules that were similar to a human-sized odor molecule, 10,000 times more molecules than the human body could produce in a 24-hour period, that the Scentlock absorbed, or activated carbon that Scentlock uses, because Scentlock doesn't absorb anything, it's the activated carbon, it absorbed 96 to 99% of all odors and 100% of all serotonins. Think about that. That's using 10,000 times more molecules than our bodies can produce in 24 hours, and it's still absorbed 96 to 99+%. And that was before they started using treated carbon and zeolite in the suit as well, because now they use carbon alloy, which is the same amount of activated coconut carbon that they've always used, but they've added treated carbon and zeolite to it, because those two, zeolite and treated carbon actually has different absorption capacities for different size molecules, which brought that 96 to 99+% up even higher. So anyway, next one will be on the technology of activated carbon, and then we are going to go through proper use, proper storage, proper care, obviously, and we'll do some other stuff. I plan on doing some stuff on these fictitious dog tests, because there's guys that say, well, what about the dog test? Well, that is so bogus. And I'll tell you why in a different video. That is just seriously bogus. These guys, they go online and say, well, it's been proven that this stuff doesn't work. It's never been proven that this does not work for deer hunting, ever. That is BS. There is no proof that activated carbon does not work for deer hunting. Tons and tons of hunters that bought Scentlock and used it improperly and got winded? Absolutely. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm the first one to agree with that. I'd say probably 80+% of bow hunters that have bought activated carbon line Scentlock suits in the past and used it got winded. I totally 100% agree with that. I'd say it's probably 90%. It's because they didn't know how to care for it, they didn't know how to store it, and they didn't know how to properly use it and what to use in conjunction with it. So yeah, that's actually factual. That is a fact. But there has never, ever been a test when Scentlock activated carbon clothing was used properly, stored properly, cared properly, and used in conjunction with the right stuff, where a dog has been able to smell a person. Of course they can smell where they walk through the vegetation. You put a dog on anything where something is moved through vegetation, they can smell the vegetation disruption on the ground. That's a no-brainer, but they didn't smell human odor. I've never seen a test where they dropped a hunter into an area with properly using Scentlock and had a dog go downwind and smell it inwind. That's never been done. So anybody that says there's proven tests, they're full of what. That is absolute BS. I've proved it to myself on hundreds and hundreds of times. I know probably a couple of thousand guys that have emailed me testimonials where they don't pay attention to wind anymore. Guys where I hunt now, because I've taught them how to do it properly, don't pay attention to wind anymore. They're killing a lot more deer, they're seeing a lot more deer. And to not take advantage of that technology, you either have to be relatively lazy or you can't afford it. I don't know. But as much money as you spend on everything else, I can't imagine the affording part is true. So anyway, we'll do another one on technology and dog tests, proper care and use, and also discuss the Scentlock suit that I designed for Scentlock. That's something else. I've never been paid by Scentlock to endorse their product. I endorse it because it works. That's the only reason I endorse it. They don't pay me a dime. But this year I will make some money from Scentlock, because they are coming out with a suit I designed, and it's called the Saddle Hunter suit. So it's going to be designed for saddle hunters. It'll have a lot of saddle hunter features. I will go over them in another on one of the next videos. But it just bugs me that that there's hunters that actually say stuff about things that they know nothing about, and you know, try to make it harder for other hunters to absorb things and take advantage of things. I don't get beat up a lot anymore. It's gotten a lot less because there's a lot of other people now that will back me up that have been using it correctly and not paying attention to wind. So, you know, I used to get beat up 10 years ago. Man, I get beat up. If I put something on Saddle Hunter Talk Forum, over half of the people would beat me up. I don't get that anymore. So, and I understand it. When I first started using ScentLok, I was definitely very hesitant to believe that it would work the way it does. I couldn't believe something would negate wind direction. And nobody ever told me it would totally negate wind direction. Even ScentLok didn't. But it does. Anyway, thank you for watching another episode of Eberhart Outdoors. And hey, hit like and subscribe. Thank you.